Have you ever laughed so hard at a joke that you forgot it was at your expense? Have you ever smiled through something that was tearing you apart inside, convinced that going along with it made you strong, made you one of them, made you belong? I did. For years I did. And I almost died because of it. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm still here to tell you this story. And honestly, there were moments when I wasn't sure I would be. This isn't just about bullying or workplace harassment or toxic friendships, though it's all of those things wrapped into one devastating package. This is about what happens when you confuse cruelty with camaraderie, when you mistake the sound of people laughing at you for the sound of people laughing with you, and when you realize far too late that some jokes aren't meant to be funny at all. They're meant to destroy you. I want to take you back to a version of myself I barely recognize anymore. A person who believed that being the butt of every joke was better than being invisible, that enduring humiliation was the price of admission to a group I desperately wanted to be part of. I was 26 years old, working at a marketing firm in the city, surrounded by people who seemed so confident, so put together, so effortlessly cool that I would have done anything to be accepted by them. And I mean anything. Looking back now, I can see how pathetic that sounds, how desperately sad it is that I valued their approval more than my own dignity. But in that moment, in that office, with those people, I genuinely believed that being included, even as their favorite target, was better than being excluded entirely. The jokes started small, harmless even, or at least that's what I told myself. They'd make comments about my clothes, the way I talked, my enthusiasm for projects that they found boring. They called me eager, a try-hard, a kiss-up, and I laughed along because I thought that's what you were supposed to do. I thought that if I could take a joke, if I could prove I wasn't sensitive or uptight, they'd eventually respect me, maybe even like me. But that's not how it works, is it? When you teach people that they can hurt you without consequences, when you show them that you'll smile through your own humiliation, they don't respect you more. They respect you less. And they keep pushing, keep testing, keep finding new ways to see just how much you'll tolerate before you finally break. I didn't know I was conducting an experiment in human cruelty. I didn't know that every time I laughed off one of their jokes, I was giving them permission to go further next time. I thought I was being resilient, adaptable, easygoing. I thought I was being strong. But strength isn't enduring abuse with a smile. Strength is knowing when to walk away, when to say no, when to demand better. And I didn't have that strength yet. Not then. The office culture was competitive in a way that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. We worked long hours. We drank together after work. We shared inside jokes and weekend plans, and from the outside it probably looked like a tight-knit team. But inside that dynamic, there was a hierarchy, an unspoken ranking system where some people were untouchable and others, like me, existed to be entertainment. There was Marcus, the creative director, whose approval everyone sought like it was oxygen. There was Stephanie, beautiful and sharp-tongued, who could destroy someone's confidence with a single withering look. There was Jake, the office clown who always had a joke ready, and somehow I became his favorite punchline. Then there were others, supporting characters in this toxic ecosystem, people who laughed along, who participated, who never once thought to ask if maybe, just maybe, things were going too far. And there I was, somewhere at the bottom of this hierarchy, grateful just to be in the room, terrified of being cast out, willing to endure almost anything to maintain my precarious position in this group that I had somehow convinced myself was worth fighting for. The jokes evolved. They started commenting on my body, my dating life, my family background. They'd create elaborate scenarios about what I probably did on weekends, always painting me as lonely, desperate, pathetic. They'd mimic the way I spoke in meetings, exaggerating my enthusiasm until it sounded ridiculous, until I started second-guessing every word that came out of my mouth. They'd accidentally leave me out of lunch plans and then make a big show of apologizing, asking if I was upset, laughing when I insisted I wasn't. And I laughed too. God help me, I laughed too. I participated in my own degradation because I thought that's what survival looked like. I remember one incident about 8 months into working there, when they started a running joke about my coffee order. I liked a specific kind of latte, something I'd order from the cafe downstairs, and somehow this became hilarious to them. They'd imitate the way I ordered it. They'd bring me ridiculous fake coffee concoctions and pretend they'd gotten it for me. They'd make comments about how high maintenance I was, how princess-like, how I thought I was too good for regular coffee. It sounds so stupid now, so inconsequential, but at the time, it made me stop ordering what I actually wanted. I started getting black coffee, something I didn't even like, just to make the joke stop. That's what happens when you're the target of relentless mockery. You start erasing yourself, piece by piece, hoping that if you can just become smaller, less noticeable, less you, maybe they'll finally leave you alone. But they never do, because the problem was never really about your coffee order or your clothes or anything specific. The problem is that they've identified you as someone who will take it, someone who won't fight back, someone whose boundaries can be violated without consequence. And once they know that about you, once they've categorized you that way, nothing you do will ever be enough to change their perception. You could become exactly like them, and they'd still find new reasons to tear you down, because that's the role you've been assigned in their twisted social structure. The breaking point didn't happen overnight. It was a slow accumulation of 1,000 small cruelties, a gradual erosion of my sense of self until I barely recognized the person staring back at me in the mirror. I stopped sleeping well. I'd lie awake at night replaying conversations, analyzing every interaction, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, how I could fix it, how I could finally earn their genuine respect instead of their contemptuous tolerance. I developed anxiety that manifested physically, my stomach constantly in knots, my hands shaking before meetings, my heart racing whenever I saw their names pop up in my email inbox. I started avoiding social situations outside of work because I was so exhausted from performing at the office, from maintaining this facade of someone who could take a joke, who was totally fine, who definitely wasn't falling apart inside. My actual friends, the people who'd known me before this job, started expressing concern. They said I'd changed, that I seemed distant, that I didn't laugh the same way anymore. And they were right. I had changed. I was disappearing, being slowly consumed by this environment that I kept insisting was normal, was just how things were, was something I needed to toughen up and deal with. The physical jokes started about a year in. It began with things that could be dismissed as accidents or playful roughhousing. Someone would bump into me hard in the hallway and laugh about how I needed to watch where I was going. They'd move my chair when I was about to sit down, thinking it was hilarious when I nearly fell. They'd hide my belongings, my notebook, my keys, my phone, and then act like I was being dramatic when I got frustrated trying to find them. Jake, in particular, seemed to delight in these physical pranks. He was a big guy, athletic and confident, and he'd often demonstrate his jokes with actual physical contact, a shove here, a grab there, always followed by that laugh that I'd learned to dread, that sound that meant I was once again the entertainment, once again the fool who everyone else could bond over mocking. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself boys will be boys, even though we were all adults in our 20s and 30s. I told myself I was being too sensitive, that I needed to lighten up, that this was just office culture and I needed to adapt if I wanted to succeed. Every excuse I made for them was an indictment of myself, a little voice in my head saying that I deserved this treatment, that I was somehow bringing it on myself, that if I were different, better, more like them, this wouldn't be happening. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. I knew, on some level, that what was happening wasn't right. But I'd invested so much in this job, in these relationships, in the idea that I belonged here, that admitting the truth would mean admitting I'd wasted over a year of my life in a place that saw me as nothing more than a punching bag with a paycheck. So I kept going. I kept showing up. I kept laughing off their jokes. And they kept pushing further, because that's what happens when there are no consequences. When someone has shown you repeatedly that they'll accept whatever you dish out. When cruelty becomes entertainment, and nobody is willing to be the one to say enough. There were moments when I almost quit. Moments when the humiliation was so acute, so overwhelming, that I'd sit in my car in the parking lot and just cry, wondering how I'd ended up here, wondering what was wrong with me that I kept subjecting myself to this treatment. But then I'd think about the bills I had to pay, the career I was trying to build, the gap that quitting would leave on my resume, and I'd talk myself into going back inside, into giving it one more day, one more week, one more month. I became an expert at compartmentalization, at separating the part of me that went to work from the part of me that existed everywhere else. Work me was cheerful, resilient, always ready with a self-deprecating joke to beat them to the punch. Real me was dying inside, drowning in shame and self-loathing, wondering if maybe they were right, If maybe I really was as pathetic and ridiculous as they seemed to think I was. The incident that changed everything happened on a Friday. We were planning a team-building event, which in retrospect is darkly hilarious because this team didn't need building. It needed dismantling and rebuilding from scratch with actual decent human beings. But that's not how corporate culture works, is it? Instead of addressing toxic dynamics, we throw people into trust falls and rope courses and call it professional development. The plan was to go to this adventure park about an hour outside the city, one of those places with zip lines and obstacle courses and various activities designed to push you outside your comfort zone and build camaraderie. I was actually excited about it, in that naive way I had of thinking that maybe this would be different, maybe in a new environment away from the office. We could reset, we could bond in a genuine way. We could finally move past this dynamic where I was everyone's favorite target. Jake had been particularly animated about the trip, talking about all the activities we'd do, how fun it would be, how we all needed to let loose and have some fun. The morning of the trip I should have known something was off. They were all exchanging looks, these little smirks and glances that spoke of some shared secret I wasn't privy to. But I ignored it, or maybe I didn't want to see it. Didn't want to acknowledge that even a day that was supposed to be about team bonding, was probably just another opportunity for them to make me the butt of their jokes. We arrived at the adventure park around 10 in the morning. The sun already bright and warm. The kind of perfect weather that makes everything seem possible, that tricks you into thinking today will be a good day. The place was beautiful, all tall trees and wooden structures, the sound of people laughing and cheering as they conquered various obstacles. For a brief moment, standing there in the parking lot with my coworkers, I felt something like hope. Maybe today would be different. Maybe today we could just be normal people having normal fun. Maybe today they'd see me as an actual human being instead of their personal entertainment. We started with some of the easier activities, warming up on ground-level obstacle courses, laughing and encouraging each other in a way that almost felt genuine. I let my guard down. That was my mistake. I allowed myself to believe that maybe finally things were changing, that this trip was exactly what we needed to reset our dynamic, to become the actual team we pretended to be in meetings with upper management. Jake was being particularly friendly, offering to help me with certain obstacles, giving me tips and encouragement, and I was so starved for positive attention from these people that I soaked it up like a desperate plant finally getting water. Around noon we moved to the high ropes course. This was the main attraction, a series of obstacles suspended between trees, platforms connected by bridges and balance beams and zip lines, all of it 20, 30, sometimes 40 feet off the ground. Safety harnesses required, of course, elaborate systems of carabiners and ropes that the staff assured us were completely secure, that had been tested and certified, that made this activity perfectly safe for participants of all skill levels. We went through the safety briefing, learning how to clip and unclip ourselves, how to move from one platform to the next, what to do if we felt uncomfortable or wanted to come down. The instructor emphasized multiple times that we should check our harnesses, that we should make sure everything was secure before attempting any obstacle. That safety was the #1 priority. I remember nodding along, taking it seriously, wanting to do everything right. I've always been a rule follower, someone who colors inside the lines, who does what they're told, who trusts that if you follow the instructions, everything will be okay. The group split up, some people heading to different sections of the course based on difficulty level and interest. Jake insisted that a group of us stick together, try one of the more challenging routes, really push ourselves. There was Marcus, Stephanie, Jake, 2 other coworkers named Trevor and Amanda, and me. 6 of us heading up to one of the higher sections of the course, all harnessed up and supposedly ready to conquer this challenge together. The climb up to the first platform was exhilarating, that particular kind of nervousness that comes with height, with stepping outside your comfort zone, with doing something that feels slightly dangerous, but is supposed to be safe. Once we were all up there, standing on this wooden platform maybe 35 feet off the ground, the world looked different. You could see over the tops of some of the trees, could feel the slight sway of the platform, could hear the wind and the distant sounds of other participants and the rustling of leaves. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Jake went first, crossing a bridge made of wooden planks and rope to the next platform with exaggerated confidence, showing off how easy it was. Stephanie followed, then Marcus, then Trevor, and Amanda. I was last, as usual, bringing up the rear, the weak link in the chain, the one they'd probably have to wait for, the one who'd probably struggle and need encouragement. and generally slow everyone down. That's what I was thinking as I stepped onto that bridge, as I felt it sway beneath my feet, as I gripped the rope handrails and tried to steady my breathing and remind myself that I was perfectly safe, that my harness was secure, that thousands of people did this every day without incident. I was about halfway across the bridge when I heard Jake's voice calling back to me, making some joke about how slow I was, asking if I needed someone to come hold my hand. The others laughed, and I felt that familiar flush of shame, that impulse to prove them wrong, to show them I could do this, to not be the pathetic one for once. So I moved faster, tried to close the gap, tried to demonstrate that I was just as capable as they were. That's when Jake did something I'll never forget, something that in my nightmares I relive over and over again. He started jumping on the platform where he was standing, creating a deliberate motion that transferred through the connecting bridge, making it bounce and sway much more violently than it had been. The others joined in, all of them jumping in rhythm, laughing as the bridge lurched and swayed beneath my feet as I grabbed desperately at the rope handrails trying to maintain my balance. I shouted at them to stop, but they couldn't hear me over their laughter, or maybe they could hear me and just didn't care. The bridge was moving like a wave now, up and down, side to side, and I was frozen in the middle of it, terrified to move forward or backward, just clinging to those ropes with everything I had. And then I felt it. A loosening, a shift, something that shouldn't be moving suddenly moving. My harness, the attachment point. I looked down in horror and realized that one of my carabiners wasn't properly secured. I don't know if I had failed to clip it correctly during the safety check, or if it had somehow come undone, or if, and this is the thought that haunts me, if someone had deliberately tampered with it when I wasn't looking. All I knew in that moment was that I was 35 feet off the ground on a violently swaying bridge with a harness that was failing. I screamed. A real scream. Not a playful shriek, but a sound of pure terror that cut through the laughter and made them stop jumping. I screamed that my harness was loose, that something was wrong, that I needed help. And in that moment, in those few seconds that felt like hours, I saw their faces change. The laughter died, replaced by something like shock or maybe fear, or maybe, for some of them, a dawning realization of how far things had gone. Jake started shouting instructions, telling me to hold still, telling me they were getting help. But the bridge was still swaying from the momentum they'd created, and I was losing my grip on the rope, and I could feel the harness shifting, sliding, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was about to fall. The human brain does strange things in moments of extreme crisis. Time doesn't move the way it's supposed to. In those seconds when I was losing my grip, when I felt the harness give way completely, when I started to fall, everything slowed down and sped up simultaneously. I remember noticing absurd details. The pattern of the bark on a nearby tree, the exact shade of blue in the sky, the sound of a bird calling somewhere in the distance. I remember thinking, this can't be happening. This isn't real. This is just another one of their jokes. And any second now I'll realize it's not as bad as it seems. But it was real. It was happening. I fell. The secondary safety line, the backup system that I barely understood when they explained it during the briefing, caught me after about 10 feet of free fall. 10 feet doesn't sound like much when you say it out loud. But when you're falling, when you've accepted that you're going to hit the ground from 35 feet up, when you've had time to imagine the impact and understand that you're probably going to die, 10 feet feels like an eternity. The safety line caught me with a violent jerk that knocked the wind out of my lungs, that sent a lightning bolt of pain through my shoulder and ribs, that left me dangling in the air, spinning slowly, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to do anything except exist in this moment of pure animal terror. I could hear screaming, someone was screaming, and it took me a moment to realize it was me, that the sound coming from my mouth wasn't words but just noise, the sound of a mind that has broken, of a body that has exceeded its capacity for fear and pain. Below me I could see the ground, could see park staff running toward my position, could see other visitors stopping to stare and point. Above me on the platform I could see my co-workers, and even through my shock and pain, I could see their faces, could read the expressions there. Horror, guilt, fear, and on Jake's face, something that looked almost like surprise, like he genuinely hadn't expected this to happen, like somehow he'd thought that making a bridge violently unstable while someone was crossing it would have no serious consequences. They got me down. I don't remember much about the rescue itself, just fragments, pieces of memory that don't quite connect. being lowered by park staff, hands supporting me, someone asking if I could breathe, if I could move my limbs, if I knew where I was. The ground feeling impossibly solid and real after those moments of hanging in space. Sitting on the grass while someone checked my vitals, while someone else called for an ambulance, while my co-workers stood in an awkward cluster nearby, not knowing what to say, how to act, whether to approach me or give me space. The ambulance arrived. They put me on a stretcher, put a collar around my neck as a precaution, started asking me questions that I answered on autopilot. Yes, I fell. No, I didn't lose consciousness. Yes, my shoulder hurt. Yes, my ribs hurt. Yes, I was having trouble breathing, but I thought that was from panic, not injury. Yes, I wanted them to take me to the hospital. And the whole time, the whole ride to the hospital, the whole check-in process at the emergency room, I kept thinking this was a joke. This was their most elaborate prank yet. Any minute now they'd jump out and yell surprise, and I'd realize I'd been overreacting, being too sensitive, failing to see the humor in a situation that was actually hilarious if I just had a better sense of humor. But nobody jumped out. This wasn't a joke. This was the inevitable conclusion of a pattern that had been building for over a year, a dynamic that started with small cruelties and escalated until someone almost died. Me. I almost died. And the fucked up thing is that even in that hospital bed, even with cracked ribs and a separated shoulder and bruises blooming across my body, even with the knowledge that I'd come within feet of hitting the ground at terminal velocity, part of me was still making excuses for them. It was an accident. They didn't mean for this to happen. I probably clipped the harness wrong myself. I'm overreacting. I should have been more careful. I should have checked my equipment better. This is probably somehow my fault. That's what trauma does. That's what sustained emotional abuse does. It rewires your brain until you can't tell the difference between accountability and self-blame, until you assume that anything bad that happens to you must be something you brought on yourself, until you defend your abusers because holding them accountable would mean admitting how badly they've hurt you, how much time you've wasted, how wrong you've been about everything. My parents arrived at the hospital a few hours later. I'd called them from the emergency room, downplaying the incident, insisting I was fine, but they heard something in my voice that made them drive 3 hours to be there anyway. When my mother walked into that hospital room and saw me, saw the state I was in, she started crying. Not dramatic tears, but quiet ones that somehow hurt worse. The kind of crying that comes from seeing your child hurt and knowing you can't fix it, knowing that something has happened that has changed them in ways you can't undo. My father just stood there, his jaw working, his hands clenched into fists, and asked me very quietly to explain what had happened. And I tried. I tried to tell them about the adventure park, about the high ropes course, about the bridge and the swaying and the harness failure and the fall. But they kept asking questions that I didn't have answers to. Why was the bridge swaying so much? Why wasn't my harness properly secured? Where were the park staff when this was happening? And then the harder questions. Who were you with? Were your co-workers involved? Has something like this happened before? Have they done other things? Have you been having problems at this job? And I couldn't answer honestly because answering honestly would mean admitting everything, would mean pulling back the curtain on the entire toxic nightmare I'd been living, would mean facing the truth I'd been running from for months. The hospital kept me overnight for observation. My injuries, while painful, weren't life-threatening. Cracked ribs, separated shoulder, extensive bruising, mild shock. I'd be sore for weeks. I'd need physical therapy for the shoulder. I'd have to take time off work to recover. But I was alive. I was incredibly, impossibly lucky to be alive. And as that realization sank in during the long hours of that hospital night, something shifted inside me. I lay there in that uncomfortable bed, listening to the beep of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital, and I started to cry. Really cry. Maybe for the first time in months, letting out everything I'd been holding in, all the fear and shame and pain and humiliation I'd been swallowing down and pretending wasn't there. I cried for the person I'd been before this job, someone who had confidence and boundaries and self-respect. I cried for the year I'd wasted trying to earn the approval of people who were never going to give it. I cried for all the moments I'd laughed off their cruelty, all the times I'd participated in my own degradation, all the warning signs I'd ignored. And I cried because I finally understood something that should have been obvious from the beginning. They were never going to respect me. It didn't matter how well I performed at work. how much I accommodated their jokes, how much of myself I erased to fit in. The problem was never me. The problem was them, and the toxic culture they'd created, and the fact that I'd somehow convinced myself that being part of that culture was worth the cost. Have you ever had a moment where everything suddenly becomes clear, where the truth you've been avoiding smashes into you with the force of a revelation? That night in the hospital was my moment. I saw the entire situation with brutal clarity, saw myself as I actually was, a person who had been systematically abused and had called it friendship, who had been degraded and had called it office culture, who had nearly died and was still making excuses for the people responsible. No more. I was done making excuses. I was done laughing off jokes that weren't funny. I was done pretending that any of this was normal, or acceptable, or okay. They had nearly killed me. Maybe not intentionally, but certainly as a result of their complete disregard for my safety and well-being. And I was going to make sure there were consequences. The next morning, a park investigator came to interview me about the incident. I told him everything, including the part about my coworkers deliberately making the bridge unstable while I was crossing. I watched his expression change as I described what had happened, watched him take notes, watched him explain that they would be reviewing footage from the security cameras they had positioned throughout the park, that they took safety extremely seriously, that they would be conducting a full investigation. Then came the company calls. First my manager, expressing concern, asking how I was feeling, saying that everyone was so worried and hoping I'd recover quickly. I was polite but distant, giving minimal information, not accepting his attempts to frame this as just an unfortunate accident. Then HR called, and that conversation was different. They were doing their own investigation, they explained. They needed to understand what had happened. They wanted to know if there was anything about the work environment I wanted to discuss, any concerns I had, any history that might be relevant to this incident. And finally, after a year of silence, after months of swallowing my truth, I talked. I told them everything. I told them about the jokes that weren't jokes, about the physical pranks, about the constant humiliation, about the environment of targeted harassment that had been building for months. I told them about every incident I could remember, gave names and dates and details, and I could hear the person on the other end of the line taking rapid notes, occasionally asking for clarification, their tone shifting from routine investigation to something much more serious. They asked if I wanted to file a formal complaint. I said yes. They asked if I felt comfortable returning to work once I was medically cleared. I said absolutely not. Not as things currently stood. Not without significant changes to the team dynamic and consequences for the people involved. They asked if I wanted to pursue legal action. I said I hadn't decided yet, but I was consulting with an attorney. And that last part was true. My father, ever practical, had already contacted a lawyer who specialized in workplace harassment and personal injury. We had a consultation scheduled for later that week. I wasn't sure I wanted to sue, wasn't sure I wanted to put myself through that process, but I wanted to know my options, wanted to understand what recourse I had, wanted them to know that I wasn't going to just accept this and move on like nothing had happened. The investigation took 2 weeks. 2 weeks during which I stayed at my parents' house recovering physically and trying to process everything emotionally. 2 weeks during which I barely slept, kept having nightmares about falling, kept feeling that moment when the harness gave way and I knew I was going to die. 2 weeks during which my former coworkers tried to reach out, sending texts and emails that ranged from genuine-seeming apologies to attempts at justification to outright gaslighting. Jake sent a long message explaining that he'd just been trying to make the activity more fun, that he never intended for anyone to get hurt, that he felt terrible about what happened. Stephanie sent a brief text saying she hoped I was okay and that things had gotten out of hand. Marcus, my manager, sent nothing personal, maintaining professional distance, probably on advice from the company's legal team. I didn't respond to any of them. What was there to say? Sorry I almost died because of your idea of fun. Thanks for feeling bad after the fact? No. I was done making them feel better about hurting me. The investigation concluded with findings that I had been subjected to a hostile work environment, that there had been a pattern of harassment and bullying that multiple team members had participated in or failed to report, and that the incident at the adventure park represented a serious safety violation and showed reckless disregard for my well-being. Jake was fired. So was Trevor, who apparently had a history of similar behavior that the company had failed to adequately address. Stephanie received a formal written warning, and was required to undergo sensitivity training, which felt like a joke considering what had happened, but apparently her level of direct involvement didn't warrant termination. Marcus was removed from his position as creative director and demoted, though he remained with the company in a different capacity. The others received various levels of disciplinary action. The company offered me a settlement. They would cover all my medical expenses, provide compensation for my injuries and pain and suffering, pay for therapy if I wanted it, and offer me either a position in a different department with no contact with any of the people involved, or a severance package if I preferred to leave the company. They also required that I sign a non-disclosure agreement, that I not speak publicly about the incident or the investigation, that I essentially take their money and disappear quietly. I stared at that settlement offer for a long time. Part of me wanted to reject it, to refuse to be silenced, to make sure everyone knew what had happened and who was responsible. But another part of me, the exhausted part, the traumatized part, the part that just wanted to move on with my life, saw the settlement for what it was. A way out, a way to close this chapter and start fresh somewhere else, with resources to support myself while I figured out what came next. I took the money. I signed the NDA. I left that company and I never looked back. And I know some people might judge that decision, might think I should have fought harder, should have made more noise, should have pursued justice in a more public way. But healing isn't always about revenge or public vindication. Sometimes it's about choosing the path that allows you to move forward, even if that path involves compromise, even if it means letting go of the satisfaction of watching them face more severe consequences. I used part of that settlement money to pay for intensive therapy, PTSD therapy specifically because that's what I had. That's what months of sustained abuse and a near-death experience had given me. I worked with a therapist who specialized in workplace trauma, who helped me understand that none of what happened was my fault, that my response of trying to fit in and go along was actually a normal survival mechanism in an abnormal situation, that I wasn't weak or pathetic or stupid for not standing up for myself sooner. She helped me understand that abuse rewires your brain, changes the way you perceive reality, makes you doubt your own judgment and instincts. She helped me rebuild my sense of self-worth, piece by piece, session by session, until I could look in the mirror and see someone worthy of respect, someone who deserved to be treated with basic human dignity, someone who had value beyond what others thought of them. I also used the money to take time to figure out what I actually wanted to do with my life, free from the desperation that had led me to stay in a toxic job for so long. I'd been so focused on career advancement, on climbing some arbitrary ladder, on meeting other people's expectations, that I'd lost sight of what I actually enjoyed, what actually made me feel fulfilled. I spent months just exploring, taking classes in things that interested me, volunteering, traveling, giving myself permission to exist without productivity being the measure of my worth. And slowly, gradually, I started to heal. The nightmares became less frequent. The panic attacks when someone made an unexpected joke lessened. I learned to distinguish between genuine playful banter and the kind of humor that has a cruel edge. Learned to walk away from situations and people that didn't feel right. Learned that it's okay to be alone rather than accept poor treatment for the sake of belonging. I learned, most importantly, to bill. Not in the literal financial sense, though I did start consulting and charging premium rates for my expertise, setting boundaries around my time and energy in ways I never had before, but billing in a broader sense. Billing people for the cost of hurting me, making them pay in whatever currency was appropriate when they crossed lines or violated boundaries or treated me as less than I deserved. If someone makes a joke at my expense now, I don't laugh it off. I name it. I say, that wasn't funny. That was cruel. And if they try to tell me I'm being too sensitive, I bill them the cost of my continued presence in their life by walking away. If a workplace shows signs of toxicity, I don't try to tough it out or change the culture from within. I bill them the cost of my labor by finding somewhere better to work. If a friend repeatedly dismisses my feelings or makes me feel small, I don't keep giving them chances to do better. I bill them the cost of our friendship by ending it. This isn't about being vindictive or unforgiving. It's about understanding that my well-being has value, that my peace has a price, that I get to decide what I will and won't accept in my life. It's about no longer offering discounts on my dignity, no longer running sales on my self-respect, no longer giving away pieces of myself for free to people who have shown they don't appreciate what they're receiving. Let me tell you something that took me way too long to learn. You teach people how to treat you. Every time you accept disrespect with a smile, you're teaching them that disrespecting you has no consequences. Every time you laugh off a cruel joke, you're teaching them that cruelty is acceptable. Every time you make excuses for someone's bad behavior, you're teaching them that their bad behavior doesn't need to change. And yes, setting boundaries can be scary. It can mean losing people you thought were friends. It can mean walking away from opportunities that look good on paper. It can mean being alone while you wait to find people in situations that meet your standards. But let me tell you what's scarier. Waking up one day and realizing you've spent years of your life accepting treatment that was slowly destroying you, that you almost died because you were too afraid of being excluded to demand basic safety and respect. The person I am now would never have stayed in that job for a week, let alone a year. The person I am now would have walked out the first time someone made me the target of their mockery. The person I am now knows that being alone with dignity is infinitely better than being included at the cost of your self-worth. But I can't regret who I was then, because that person, that version of me who laughed off jokes that weren't funny and tried so hard to belong somewhere she was never truly welcome, that person taught me everything I needed to learn about resilience and boundaries and the true meaning of strength. I'm not grateful for what happened to me. I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone. The trauma was real, the injuries were real, the damage to my mental health was real, and took years to heal. But I'm grateful for who I became because of it, for the lessons I learned, for the clarity I gained about what matters and what doesn't, for the unshakable sense of self-worth that no one can take from me now, because I finally understand that it doesn't come from external validation. It comes from knowing deep in your bones that you deserve respect and kindness and basic human decency, and being willing to walk away from anyone or anything that can't provide those things. I started consulting about 2 years after leaving that company, working with organizations on culture and team dynamics, helping them identify and address toxic patterns before they escalate to the point mine did. It's meaningful work. Work that feels like I'm taking my experience and turning it into something useful. Something that might prevent someone else from going through what I went through. I work with HR departments, with managers, with teams, teaching them about the warning signs of workplace harassment, about the difference between healthy workplace banter and systematic degradation, about how to create environments where people feel safe speaking up when something isn't right. And I charge a lot for this work, not because I'm greedy, but because I finally understand the value of my expertise, my time, my emotional labor. I'm billing them appropriately for what I provide. I've also become an advocate for stronger workplace protections, for better enforcement of anti-harassment policies, for holding companies accountable when they enable toxic cultures. I speak at conferences, I write articles, I consult with lawmakers about potential legislation, all while working within the constraints of my NDA, finding ways to share the lessons without sharing the specific details of my case. It's not always easy. There are days when the memories hit hard, when something triggers a flashback and I'm back on that bridge feeling it sway, feeling the harness give way, experiencing that terrible certainty that I'm about to die. There are days when I struggle with trust, when I overanalyze every interaction looking for signs of mockery or disrespect, when I have to consciously remind myself that not everyone is like them, that healthy relationships and workplaces do exist, that it's possible to be part of a group without being the target. But those days are fewer now. And on the hard days, I remind myself how far I've come, how that broken person in the hospital bed found a way to stand up and demand better, how I took the worst experience of my life and used it as fuel to build something meaningful. I think about the messages I get from people who've heard me speak or read my work, people who share their own stories of workplace harassment, who thank me for putting words to experiences they thought were normal or acceptable, who found the courage to leave toxic situations or speak up about mistreatment because of something I said. That's my real compensation. That's the true billing, the meaningful payment for everything I endured. Every person who sets a boundary they wouldn't have set before. Every person who walks away from a situation that's harming them. Every person who refuses to laugh off treatment that isn't funny. That's a return on the investment of my pain. I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago. I'm louder, harder in some ways, less willing to accommodate or smooth things over, or make other people comfortable at the expense of my own well-being. Some people find this version of me difficult, too intense, too quick to call out problematic behavior. And you know what? I'm okay with that. Because the people who find me difficult now are usually the people who would have found the old me convenient, who would have benefited from my inability to set boundaries, who would have taken advantage of my desperate need to be liked. The right people, the healthy people, the people who treat others with respect and kindness, they don't find me difficult. They find me clear. They appreciate that I say what I mean and mean what I say, that I don't play games or hint at things or expect them to read my mind. They respect my boundaries because they have healthy boundaries of their own, because they understand that relationships should be mutually beneficial, not one-sided extractions where one person gives and gives while the other takes and takes. I've built a life now that the old me would barely recognize. I work for myself, setting my own hours and choosing my own clients. I have a small circle of genuine friends, people who have proven over time that they respect me, people with whom I can be fully myself without fear of judgment or mockery. I have a partner now, someone I met about 18 months ago, someone who was patient with my trust issues and trauma responses, who never once made me feel bad about the healing I still needed to do. Someone who, on our third date, made a self-deprecating joke and immediately noticed me tense up and asked if I was okay, if he'd said something wrong. And when I explained haltingly about my history with jokes and how sometimes I still struggled to distinguish between someone making fun of themselves and someone making fun of me, he didn't laugh or tell me I was being too sensitive. He just said, "Thank you for telling me. I'll be more careful about that." That's what respect looks like. That's what healthy relationships look like. That's the standard I've set for my life now, and I refuse to accept less. So let me ask you something. Wherever you are, whatever situation you're in, are you laughing off jokes that hurt? Are you making excuses for people who treat you poorly? Are you telling yourself that you're being too sensitive, that you need to toughen up, that this is just how things are? Are you staying in a job, a relationship, a friendship, a family dynamic that slowly erodes your sense of self-worth, that makes you feel small and stupid and wrong? Are you participating in your own degradation because leaving or speaking up seems harder than staying? I need you to understand something. You deserve better. I don't care what they've told you about yourself. I don't care how long you've been in this situation. I don't care how invested you are in making it work. You deserve to be treated with respect. You deserve to exist in spaces where you feel safe and valued. You deserve to have boundaries that are honored. You deserve to say no without having to justify or explain. You deserve to walk away from things that harm you, even if those things are familiar, even if leaving means starting over, even if other people don't understand your decision. And if you're reading this and thinking, "But you don't understand. My situation is different. It's more complicated than that," I want you to know that I had all those same thoughts. I told myself my situation was complicated too. I told myself there were reasons to stay, good reasons, practical reasons. I told myself that leaving would be harder than enduring, and I almost died because of those thoughts. Don't wait for your moment on the bridge. Don't wait until something catastrophic happens to finally demand better. Start now. Start small if you need to. Start by naming one thing that isn't okay, one boundary you're going to set, one person you're going to stop making excuses for. Start by believing that you're worth the discomfort of change, worth the risk of standing up for yourself, worth the investment of building a life where you don't have to laugh off your own pain. I used to laugh off their jokes because I thought that's what strength looked like, because I thought that being able to take whatever they dished out proved I was tough and resilient and capable. But real strength isn't enduring abuse with a smile. Real strength is recognizing that you deserve better and doing whatever it takes to get it. Real strength is walking away from situations that harm you, even when staying seems easier. Real strength is believing in your own worth even when everyone around you treats you as worthless. Real strength is what I found in that hospital bed, when I finally stopped making excuses and started demanding accountability and billing, learning to bill for every violation of my boundaries, every moment of disrespect, every instance of harm, making people pay the cost of treating me poorly by removing my presence from their lives, by refusing to discount my worth, by charging full price for the privilege of being part of my world. That's the lesson it took me almost dying to learn. That's the truth I wish someone had told me years ago. That you don't have to accept mistreatment to belong, because any belonging that requires you to diminish yourself isn't worth having. That the right people, the healthy people, the people worth keeping in your life, they won't make you pay with your dignity for the privilege of their company. Have you ever experienced something similar to what I went through? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you were accepting treatment you knew was wrong, but couldn't seem to break free from? Share your story in the comments below. You're not alone in this. There are so many of us who've been where you are, who understand what it's like to feel trapped, to make excuses for inexcusable behavior, to lose yourself trying to fit in somewhere you were never truly welcome. And if my story helps even one person recognize their own situation, helps even one person find the courage to demand better, then everything I went through will have meant something beyond just my own painful education. This channel, Living Through It, exists to share these real experiences, these honest accounts of surviving difficult situations and coming out the other side changed but whole. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own life and relationships, please leave a comment. Tell me what stood out to you, what you connected with, what questions you still have. And please, if this video touched you in any way, if you found value in my story or learned something that might help you in your own life, hit that like button. It helps this message reach more people who might need to hear it, more people who are where I was, still trapped in situations they don't know how to escape from, still making excuses for treatment they should never have to endure. Subscribe to Living Through It for more real stories from real people who've survived things they never thought they could survive, who've learned lessons they wish they hadn't had to learn, who are willing to share their pain and their healing in the hope that it might make someone else's journey a little less lonely. And hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story, a new perspective, a new reminder that whatever you're going through, you can get through it, you can come out the other side, you can build a life where you don't have to laugh off your own suffering. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being willing to hear hard truths about toxic dynamics and personal responsibility, and the cost of accepting less than you deserve. You matter. Your well-being matters. Your dignity matters. And you deserve to live a life where you never have to question those truths, where you never have to laugh off jokes that aren't funny, where you never have to accept cruelty disguised as camaraderie. Remember, I used to laugh off their jokes because I didn't know any better, because I thought that's what survival looked like. After one of their jokes nearly killed me, I learned to bill instead. I learned to charge full price for my presence, my time, my energy. I learned to make people pay the cost of mistreating me by withdrawing what they took for granted. And now I live a life where respect isn't something I beg for or earn through endurance. It's the baseline, the non-negotiable foundation of every relationship and interaction I have. That's the life waiting for you too, if you're brave enough to demand it, if you're strong enough to believe you deserve it, if you're willing to stop laughing off the pain and start billing for the harm. Your life is waiting, go claim it.